I can't believe this is happening, Maya muttered to herself as she stood in front of the mansion's grand entrance. Her heart raced, hands trembling as she clutched the worn leather strap of her old purse. This was it. Her first day as a live-in maid at the Hawthorne estate, and everything about it screamed out of her league. The house was enormous, its windows glimmering with a cold, elegant brilliance. She had seen mansions like this on TV, but to be standing in front of one, on the threshold of a job she desperately needed, was almost unreal. Maya glanced at the driveway, where a sleek black car pulled up with a confident hum, the driver's uniform crisp and perfect. She straightened her back, trying to push aside the familiar feeling of inadequacy that often rose when she found herself in places like this. She wasn't just here to clean. She was here to take care of two children who had lost their mother. The twins, Ethan and Lily Hawthorne, were the heirs to a fortune. She had heard the rumors. The kids were difficult. The kind of children who had broken nannies before, and no one had been able to make them feel safe, let alone loved. Maya took a deep breath, looking up at the massive front door with its intricate carvings. The golden letters gleamed in the light, Hawthorne Estates. She walked up the marble steps, her shoes clicking softly on the smooth stone. She could hear faint laughter and the sound of footsteps approaching. She was about to meet them, the twins who had turned other nannies away, who had been through a dozen failed attempts at having someone care for them. What if she failed too? What if they didn't want her here? She had no time for second-guessing. With a quick nod to herself, she rang the doorbell. It was answered by a tall butler with a warm but detached smile. "Ms. Williams, I presume?" he asked, his voice smooth as he stepped aside to allow her in. Maya nodded, her nerves flaring up, but she kept her expression steady. The butler led her inside, and she couldn't help but marvel at the opulence that surrounded her. The marble floors, the grand staircase with its golden railing, the light fixtures that shimmered like stars. This was a world she had never known. They walked down a long corridor, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence. At the end of the hallway, the door to the twins' room opened. Inside, the kids were playing. Ethan, the boy, was sitting on the floor, building something out of blocks, while Lily, his twin sister, was tossing a ball against the wall. Neither seemed to notice her presence. Maya hesitated for a moment, unsure how to begin. But then Lily looked up and froze, her wide eyes locking onto Maya's. The girl's face was a mix of curiosity and something else, something Maya couldn't quite place. Ethan turned his head, his expression equally unreadable. "You must be the new maid," Ethan said coolly, not bothering to look away from his blocks. Maya felt the weight of his words, the coldness in his tone. She had expected nothing less. "That's right," Maya replied softly, doing her best to keep her voice steady. "I'm here to help." Lily remained silent, still staring at her. Maya didn't know what to say. The tension in the room was thick. She had worked with children before, but these weren't just any kids. These were the Hawthorne twins, the ones who had pushed every other nanny to their breaking point. She had to prove herself, had to show them that she wasn't like the others. She couldn't fail. Not this time. Maya took a step forward, but Lily didn't budge. Instead, the girl tossed the ball again, this time harder, and it bounced off the wall with a loud thud. Ethan didn't react, but Maya caught the slight smirk on his lips. The game had begun. The stakes were high, but Maya wasn't going to back down. "I don't mind a challenge," she whispered to herself, stepping into the room. The game was on. I had only been here for a few hours, and already, Maya felt like she was walking on eggshells. Ethan had barely acknowledged her presence, and Lily, though watching her carefully, remained distant, as if expecting Maya to fail just like all the others before her. She had cleaned the house, organized the twins' rooms, and even tried to make a simple conversation, but the silence was always louder than her words. She was used to people underestimating her, but she wasn't about to let it get to her. She had a job to do, and she wasn't going to quit. Before she even got started, the day dragged on, and Maya couldn't help but feel the weight of the mansion press down on her. The hallways seemed endless, and the rooms, though luxurious, felt cold and unwelcoming. She was just a maid here, a person to clean up after the rich, to be unseen and unheard, but Maya knew her worth. She wasn't just some servant. She had dreams and ambitions, and one day, she would prove that she could do more than just clean. The evening came, and Maya entered the twins' room once again to prepare them for bed. Ethan was sitting at his desk, scribbling in a notebook, while Lily was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Maya took a deep breath and walked over to Ethan, her steps steady and sure. "Ethan," she said softly, "it's time for bed." He didn't even look up. "I'm not tired." Maya gave him a small smile, though it was hard to hide the feeling of rejection that washed over her. "I know, but you still need rest." Ethan finally glanced at her, his eyes full of annoyance. "You can't tell me what to do," he said sharply, his voice cold. Maya didn't back down. "I can help you get ready for bed. You'll feel better in the morning." She watched as he clenched his jaw, clearly irritated, but he didn't say anything more. Maya turned to Lily, who was still lying on her bed, the same far-off look in her eyes. "Lily," she said gently, "are you ready for bed?" Lily didn't answer, but after a moment, she slowly nodded and sat up. Maya smiled and started pulling back the covers, tucking Lily in with care. As she did, she noticed the way Lily's eyes lingered on her, studying her as if trying to figure something out. "Why did you come here?" Lily asked quietly. Maya paused for a second, unsure how to answer. She wasn't sure if Lily was talking about the house or her being a maid. "I came here to help," Maya said softly, "and I want to make sure you both feel safe." Lily's expression softened for a brief moment, but just as quickly, it returned to its guarded state. "I don't need anyone's help," she said, her voice distant. Maya knew it wasn't true, but she didn't push. Instead, she just smiled, tucking Lily in tighter. "Good night, Lily." "Good night," Lily whispered back. Maya stood up and walked to the door, pausing before she left the room. She glanced at the two twins, one still looking at her with suspicion, the other lost in her own world. Maya closed the door quietly behind her and let out a long breath. She had made it through the first night, but tomorrow would be harder. She had to find a way to reach them, to make them trust her. She couldn't just be the maid. She had to be something more, and she would find a way to prove it. I woke up to the soft chirping of birds outside the window, the sun beginning to peek through the curtains of the guest room where Maya had spent the night. The house felt quieter this morning, almost as if it was holding its breath. Maya stretched and yawned, rubbing her eyes as she tried to shake off the feeling of uncertainty that had haunted her since she first stepped into this mansion. It had only been a day, but it felt like a lifetime. Her first night here had been a test of her patience, her ability to connect with the twins, and most importantly, her resolve to not give up. She was here for a reason, and no matter how tough it got, she couldn't back down. She had a job to do. After a quick breakfast, she made her way to the twins' room. It was just past 8 a.m., and she hoped to find a way to talk to them before the house grew busier with staff and visitors. As she walked down the grand hallway, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence. The mansion was beautiful, but it lacked warmth. It was a home in name only, a cold shell that echoed with emptiness. She arrived at the twins' room and knocked lightly on the door. "Come in," Ethan's voice called out from inside. Maya pushed the door open, her heart racing as she entered. Both Ethan and Lily were sitting on the floor, not playing, just staring at their toys. The tension in the air was thick, as if neither of them wanted to acknowledge her. Maya took a deep breath. "Good morning," she said with a gentle smile. Neither child responded, but Maya could see the smallest flicker of acknowledgement in their eyes. "I thought we could talk a little today," Maya continued, sitting down on the edge of the bed, not too close, but not too far. "I know things have been a little strange since I got here, but I'm here to help. You don't have to talk to me if you don't want to, but I just want to make sure you're both okay." There was a long pause. Maya could feel the weight of their silence pressing against her. Ethan shifted slightly, but didn't look at her. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice flat, though there was a hint of something. Curiosity, perhaps. Maya hesitated, not expecting that question. "I don't want anything from you. I just want to make sure you're both safe and comfortable. I want to help you feel better." Lily finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "But no one else has been able to help. Why should we believe you will?" Maya looked at her, her eyes softening. "I don't expect you to believe me right away. It takes time, and I understand that. But I'm not like the others. I'm not going to give up on you." Ethan looked at Maya, his expression still guarded, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was beginning to wonder if she was different. "How do you plan on making us feel better?" he asked, his tone still skeptical, but no longer as cold. Maya smiled gently, her heart swelling with a mixture of hope and determination. By listening to you, by giving you space when you need it, and by being here when you're ready. I'm not going anywhere. Lily's eyes flickered for a second, as if she was processing Maya's words, but she didn't say anything more. Ethan, on the other hand, was quiet for a long time. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed. Maybe you can help. But we'll see. Maya's smile widened, and for the first time since she stepped into this house, she felt a small spark of hope. It was a start. She didn't expect miracles right away, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't giving up. She had a job to do, and this time, she was determined to make a difference. I woke up to the sound of the soft morning light filtering through the curtains, the warmth of the sun already beginning to seep into the room. The mansion was quiet again, but today, there was something different in the air. Yesterday had been a small breakthrough with Ethan and Lily, and Maya could feel it. There was a subtle shift, a crack in the wall they had built around themselves. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. The twins had suffered enough, and even though they hadn't fully opened up to her, Maya could see that her presence was beginning to make an impact. She had learned not to rush them, not to force her way into their lives. Instead, she allowed space for them to come to her when they were ready. Today, she would do the same. As Maya moved through the house, she felt a sense of purpose that she hadn't felt before. The mansion still felt cold, still felt like a place of secrets and unresolved pain, but now it was also a place where she could start to make a difference. She started her day as she always did, cleaning and tidying up, making sure everything was in its place. She hadn't been asked to do anything more than the usual chores, but today she felt more determined than ever to prove that she could do more. After finishing the main rooms, she made her way to the twins' room. She knocked gently on the door before stepping inside. Ethan was sitting on the floor, reading a book, and Lily was at the window, gazing outside, lost in thought. Neither of them seemed particularly eager to speak, but Maya didn't mind. She wasn't there to push them, she was there to be present. "Morning, you two," she said softly, her voice warm but calm. Lily glanced over her shoulder, meeting Maya's eyes briefly before turning her attention back to the window. Ethan, however, didn't even look up from his book. Maya smiled to herself, knowing that she had to be patient. She walked over to Lily, who was still staring outside. "What are you looking at?" she asked gently. Lily hesitated before answering. "Nothing," she said quietly, almost as if she didn't want to admit she was lost in her own thoughts. Maya nodded, sitting down beside her at the window, giving her the space she needed without intruding. Ethan finally put his book down and looked at Maya, his expression unreadable. "Why are you still here?" he asked, his tone direct. Maya met his gaze, her expression sincere. "I'm here because I want to help you," she said simply. "And I'm not going anywhere." There was a long silence, and Maya wasn't sure if Ethan was going to say anything more. But then he spoke again, this time more softly. "You don't know what it's like." Maya looked at him, her heart aching for him, for both of them. "No, I don't," she said quietly. "But I'm willing to listen if you want to talk." Ethan seemed to think about it for a moment, his gaze still steady. Then, almost as if he had decided to let her in, he sighed. "It's just hard," he admitted, his voice vulnerable in a way Maya hadn't heard before. "Everything's different now. Mom's gone, and everything changed." Maya nodded, understanding more than he knew. "I can't imagine how hard that must be," she said softly. "But you don't have to go through it alone. I'm here, and I'm not going to give up on you." For the first time since Maya had arrived, she saw a flicker of something in Ethan's eyes. Maybe it was trust, maybe it was a glimmer of hope. Either way, it was a sign that things were starting to change. Lily turned away from the window and looked at Maya, her expression softer than before. "Do you really think you can help?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Maya smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I know I can," she said with confidence. And in that moment, Maya knew that she was starting to break through the walls that had held these children captive for so long. I walked into the kitchen early the next morning, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning that made Maya feel like she could take a breath without the weight of the world pressing on her chest. It had been a few days since the conversation with Ethan and Lily, and while things hadn't drastically changed, there was a subtle shift. The twins were still guarded, but they no longer avoided her completely. It was a start, and Maya was determined to keep pushing forward. She made herself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, her mind racing with thoughts about the twins. She had learned more about them in these few days than in all the time she'd spent working here before. Ethan's cold exterior hid a deep pain, a grief he hadn't fully processed. Lily, on the other hand, had built walls so high that Maya wasn't sure where to start. She had caught glimpses of vulnerability in both of them, but it was like trying to find pieces of a puzzle in the dark. As Maya sipped her coffee, she heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and his usual aloof expression in place. "You're up early," Maya said with a gentle smile, trying to ease the tension she always felt around him. Ethan shrugged, his gaze drifting to the coffee pot. "I couldn't sleep," he muttered. "Thought I'd grab some coffee." Maya stood up and poured him a cup. "It's not much, but it's fresh," she said, handing him the mug. Ethan took it without a word and sat down at the table across from her. There was a long silence, the kind that often hung between them. Maya decided to break it. "You know, I've been thinking. We should do something together today. Maybe a game or a movie. Something to take our minds off everything." Ethan didn't respond at first, but Maya could see the wheels turning in his head. After a moment, he looked up at her, his eyes less guarded than usual. "I guess it wouldn't hurt," he said, his voice quieter, less sharp. Maya smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "Great. I'll grab something for us to do," she said, already standing up. As she left the kitchen to gather some board games from the living room, she couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. It wasn't going to be easy to break through to these kids, but she was starting to believe that, in time, she could get there. When she returned with the games, she found Ethan still sitting at the table, his coffee half drunk. He looked up at her with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Maya set the board games down in front of him. "So what do you think? Want to give it a try?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Sure, why not?" They played for hours, and it wasn't just the games that helped break the ice. As they spent more time together, Maya could see little pieces of Ethan's walls crumbling. He was still guarded, still had that tough exterior, but he was starting to let her in, just a little. At the end of the day, as Maya was about to leave the room, Ethan spoke again, this time with something softer in his voice. "Thanks for not giving up on us," he said, his eyes meeting hers for the first time without that hard edge. Maya smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest that had been missing for so long. "I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. And I'm here for you, no matter what." As she left the room, she couldn't help but feel a small sense of triumph. It wasn't much, but for the first time since she arrived, she felt like she was starting to make a real difference. I walked into the twins' room early the next morning, a feeling of quiet anticipation settling over me. Things were starting to feel a little more normal, or at least as close to normal as they could be in this house. Ethan and Lily had opened up more in the past few days, and the distance between us had begun to shrink. It wasn't dramatic, but I could see small changes, like Ethan actually sitting at the table for breakfast without a scowl, or Lily making eye contact with me when I spoke. It was something. It was enough to keep me going. As I entered the room, I saw Lily sitting at her desk, quietly flipping through a book. Ethan was nowhere in sight, which was unusual for him, but I figured he'd be around soon. I cleared my throat softly to get her attention. "Hey, Lily," I said, keeping my voice light. She looked up, her expression still a bit guarded but softer than it had been when I first arrived. "Good morning, Maya," she replied, her voice still quiet but no longer distant. "Did you sleep well?" I asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed. Lily nodded slowly, closing her book and placing it on the desk. "Yeah, better than I expected." I smiled at that. "That's good," I said. "I'm glad." There was a pause before Lily spoke again. "Maya, I was thinking," she started, her voice hesitant. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What about?" She shifted slightly in her seat, her hands fiddling with the edges of her book. "Well, Ethan, he's not really. I don't think he likes you, at least not like he likes me," she said, her words carefully chosen. I frowned, unsure where she was going with this. "It's not that," Lily continued. He's been like this for a long time. It's not about you. It's just," she trailed off, looking uncertain. "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning in slightly, trying to understand. Lily glanced at the door before lowering her voice, as if she was making sure no one else could hear. "He's scared," she said quietly, Scared of getting close to people because he doesn't want to get hurt again. He's been like that since Mom died. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. I could see it now. The walls around Ethan were thicker than I'd realized, built up over years of loss and pain. I think he just doesn't know how to let anyone in, Lily continued, her voice small. And he thinks if he doesn't care about anyone, no one can hurt him. My heart ached for both of them, for what they had been through, for how they were both carrying so much pain, trying to hide it behind walls no one could break down. I understand, I said softly, my voice steady. I know it's not easy, but Ethan doesn't have to do this alone. He doesn't have to be scared of letting people care about him. Lily looked up at me, her expression serious. You think he'll ever believe that? She asked. I nodded slowly. I do, I said, meeting her gaze. But it'll take time. He needs to know that it's okay to trust, and that he doesn't have to carry everything by himself. Lily was quiet for a moment, and I could see her processing what I said. Finally, she spoke again, this time with a hint of hope in her voice. I think maybe he's starting to trust you, she said. It's small, but I think he is. My heart warmed at her words. Thank you, Lily, I said, my voice sincere. I'm going to keep being here for both of you. And when Ethan is ready, I'll be there for him, too. Lily gave a small nod, her face softening as she stood up. I hope so, she whispered, and I could see the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes as well. As I left the room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in days. I wasn't sure what the future would hold for me, or for the twins, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. I stepped into the living room, the morning light streaming through the large windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Maya had spent the entire morning cleaning, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. The mansion felt less like a cold, impersonal place and more like a home. At least, it had the potential to be. The twins had started opening up, ever so slightly, but it was enough to give her hope. She knew it wasn't going to be easy, and she wasn't expecting any immediate changes. But that didn't stop her from feeling like they were moving in the right direction. Maya was making progress with Ethan, even if it was small progress. He still kept his distance, still had that wall up, but she could see it now. The cracks were beginning to show. He was letting her in, even if just a little. Lily, too, had changed. She was quieter now, more willing to talk, and Maya could sense that she was starting to trust her more. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maya sat down on the couch, looking around at the grand living room. The large chandelier above her seemed to glow in the soft light, and the polished wooden floors reflected the sunlight in a warm, inviting way. It was a beautiful home, but it lacked warmth. Maya knew she could change that. She had already made more of an impact than she had expected, and with every small step, she felt closer to her goal. She wanted to be more than just the maid in this house. She wanted to be someone the twins could rely on, someone who would never leave them, no matter how difficult it got. As Maya sat there, lost in her thoughts, she heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind her. She turned around to see Ethan standing in the doorway, looking at her. His expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes that Maya couldn't quite place. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Maya nodded, her heart skipping a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, and now that it was finally here, she wasn't sure what to expect. "Of course," she said, standing up and walking over to him. "What's on your mind?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the floor for a moment before meeting hers. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice low. Maya was taken aback. Apologize? For what? She had expected him to be distant, to brush her off, but this was different. "Apologize for what?" she asked, confused. Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "For being a jerk. I've been rude to you, and I know it. I didn't mean to, but I've been pushing people away for so long. I didn't know how else to act." Maya's heart softened as she looked at him. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes now, the raw honesty that he had been hiding for so long. "Ethan," she said gently, "you don't have to apologize to me. I understand. You've been through a lot, and I know it's not easy to trust people. But I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gaze flickering with something Maya couldn't quite identify. Then, slowly he nodded. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I didn't think I could ever trust anyone again. But maybe I can start with you." Maya smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't much, but it was a breakthrough. For the first time since she arrived, she felt like they were finally beginning to understand each other. The walls Ethan had built were slowly coming down, and Maya was determined to help him tear down the rest of them. She wasn't going to give up on him. Not now, not ever. I'm glad to hear that, she said softly. And I'll be here, every step of the way. Ethan gave a small, almost imperceptible smile before turning to leave the room. As he walked away, Maya sat back down on the couch, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't going to be quick, but Maya knew one thing for sure. She was making a difference. And that was enough to keep her going. I had no idea what to expect as I walked into the twins' room the next morning. The last few days had been a delicate balance. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. But today felt different. Ethan's apology, though simple, had been a small breakthrough, and even though Lily had barely said a word since, I could see her watching me more closely, her eyes softening just a little each time. The house still felt quiet, but the silence wasn't as heavy anymore. I was starting to feel a strange sense of belonging in this grand, cold mansion. As I entered the room, I saw both Ethan and Lily sitting on the floor. Ethan was flipping through a comic book, his face focused but still carrying that same guarded expression. Lily, on the other hand, was sitting with her legs crossed, staring off into space, her mind clearly somewhere else. I cleared my throat to break the silence, walking toward them. "Morning, you two," I said, my voice calm but warm. Ethan glanced up, nodded briefly, and went back to his comic. Lily didn't react at first, but after a moment, she turned her head, her eyes meeting mine. "Morning," she said quietly. It wasn't much, but it was something. I smiled and sat down on the floor beside them. "How about we do something different today?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Maybe go outside for a bit, get some fresh air?" Ethan looked up at me, a frown tugging at the corners of his lips. "Why?" he asked, his voice still sharp but tinged with curiosity. "Because sitting around all day isn't fun," I said with a smile. "And I think a little sunshine might do us all some good." I looked over at Lily, who was still quiet but seemed to be considering the suggestion. After a long pause, she finally nodded. "Okay," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan sighed, clearly not thrilled with the idea, but willing to go along with it. "Fine, whatever." We headed outside together, the warm afternoon sun washing over us as we walked through the sprawling garden behind the house. The space was vast and beautiful, with lush green grass and tall trees that swayed gently in the breeze. It felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension inside the house. We found a spot under a large oak tree, and I sat down on the grass, motioning for the twins to join me. Ethan reluctantly sat beside me, while Lily hesitated for a moment before sitting down on the other side. For a few moments, we simply sat in silence, the only sound being the rustling of leaves and the distant chirp of birds. I could feel the tension still lingering, but it wasn't as thick as before. I glanced at Ethan, who seemed to be lost in thought, and then at Lily, who was gazing at the sky. "So, what do you two like to do for fun?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Ethan shrugged without looking at me. "Nothing. There's nothing to do here." Lily spoke up before I could respond. "We used to go to the beach," she said softly, her voice tinged with a hint of longing. "Before, everything changed." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had known they had lost their mother, but I didn't realize how deeply it had affected them. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, not sure what else to say. "It must be hard." Lily nodded, her eyes distant. "Yeah," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her for a moment, then quickly looked away, his face a mixture of discomfort and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "We're fine," he muttered, as if saying it out loud would somehow make it true. I didn't push the subject. Instead, I sat back and let them take the lead. It wasn't about me fixing things or forcing them to talk. It was about being there, letting them know they weren't alone. After a while, we all stood up, the sun beginning to dip lower in the sky. The walk back to the house was quiet, but there was a subtle change in the air. Ethan and Lily were still distant, but I could see something in their eyes, a flicker of something that hadn't been there before. It wasn't much, but it was progress. As we reached the house, Lily turned to me, her expression softer than before. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice still small but sincere. "For today." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. Anytime, Lily, I said gently. I'm here, whenever you need me. It wasn't a grand gesture, and it wasn't an instant fix, but it was a start. And in that moment, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was starting to break through the walls that had kept them so isolated for so long. I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway. The house was still, the morning light gently filtering through the blinds. It had been weeks since I started working here, and though things had been far from perfect, I felt a change. It wasn't obvious, but I could feel it. Ethan and Lily were slowly starting to trust me. Each day, there was a little more openness, a little less distance. I had made my way into their lives slowly, never pushing, always waiting for the moment when they were ready to take a step toward me. The past few days had been quieter. The house was still massive, still cold, but it no longer felt like a prison. I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was starting to become part of their lives, part of their family. As I walked into the kitchen, I was greeted by the familiar sight of Ethan sitting at the table, his nose buried in a book. He didn't even look up when I entered. I made myself a cup of coffee, trying not to disturb him. He didn't always talk to me, but his presence was enough. It was a step, a small one, but it meant something. Morning, Maya, came Lily's soft voice from behind me. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her expression neutral, but her eyes meeting mine. Good morning, Lily, I replied with a smile. She stepped into the room and sat down at the table beside Ethan. The three of us sat there in comfortable silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. It wasn't awkward, just peaceful. It was the first time I'd felt this way since coming to this house. After a while, Ethan finally looked up from his book. You know, he started, his voice quieter than usual, you're not as bad as I thought you would be. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by the compliment. Oh yeah? What made you change your mind? I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Ethan shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his lips. I don't know. You're not like the others. You don't try to make us do things we don't want to do, and you don't get mad when we don't listen. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. Well, I'm not here to make you do anything. I'm here to help, and when you're ready, I'll be here for you. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze flicking to Lily, who was quietly eating her cereal. Lily caught his eye and then looked at me. I think you've helped more than you know, she said softly. I was taken aback by her words, but I didn't let it show. I'm glad I could help, I said, my voice steady. And I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for both of you. There was a long pause, and for the first time, I saw a small, hesitant smile appear on Lily's face. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. I felt a flicker of hope ignite inside me. This was it, the breakthrough I had been waiting for. Ethan shifted in his seat, then slowly stood up. I think we should do something today, he said, his voice still low but warmer than usual. I looked at him, surprised by the suggestion. Like what? I asked. Ethan shrugged again, but this time there was less resistance in his movements. I don't know, maybe a movie or something. I don't want to sit around all day either. I nodded, smiling. That sounds like a good idea. The rest of the morning passed by easily, the three of us spending time together. We didn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the kind of quiet understanding that comes when people start to trust each other. By the end of the day, as I was leaving their room, Ethan looked at me again, his expression softer than before. Thanks for today, he said, his voice a little more sincere. I nodded, my heart swelling with gratitude. Anytime, Ethan. Anytime. As I walked away, I couldn't help but feel that things were finally starting to change. It wasn't a huge shift, but it was enough. I had broken through to them, and that was all that mattered.